Thank you very much to CAA for the invitation to present on behalf of Aus-ROC. I will explain a little more about what that's all about if you haven't heard of it, but just a little bit about me. I'm based predominantly in Curtin in Western Australia, but I have an affiliation with Monash University and also I work very closely with St John Ambulance West Australia. Long-standing history with ILCOR and as you can see, the Australian Resuscitation Council. What is Aus-ROC? Well, it started out as a grant from the National Health and Medical Research Council some 7 years ago now, and it was a venture to bring together universities with ambulance services across 3 states to look at addressing some of the important research questions that were outstanding and also to foster collaboration between academics and industry partners. So we're very pleased to have set this up. It was administratively based at Monash University in Melbourne, and I was the director and used to go to Melbourne 1 week a month for 5 years, so that was great fun. So we still continued on after the funding is finished, and we've been really fortunate that one of our major aims of Aus-ROC was the establishment of an Epistry. It had been a vision of a number of people for a number of years. That's bringing together epistries or registries, cardiac arrest registries from different ambulance services in Australia and New Zealand, and putting them all together so that we could do some comparative measurements. Initially, not every state had a cardiac arrest registry, and in fact, West Australia was the first cardiac arrest registry in Australia, starting in 1996, followed soon after by Victoria, and afterwards there was successive states came on board. I think we were really motivated by the concept, this has been shown a few times now, that if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. You've got to know what is it that we're doing, and therefore we can identify strategies that will improve that. We were very pleased to see that the GRA, in its 10 steps to improve survival of cardiac arrest, put number 1 as establish a cardiac arrest registry. So we got together people from around Australia and New Zealand that were attached to the ambulance services in that particular state, together with some of us academics, and nutted out how we were going to set up this epistry. Clearly we had to get a lot of buy-in of trust and willingness to share data, and that's been a real cultural change over the last decade. I think all organisations, and particularly ambulance services a decade ago, were pretty concerned about keeping their figures to themselves for fear of being judged poorly if they weren't as good as other organisations. We really modelled this Aus-ROC on the North American Resuscitation Outcomes Consortium, and they'd actually reported survival outcomes across a number of organisations or ambulance services in America. And I spoke to the director of the ambulance service, who actually came in ranked lowest, and I said, do you feel a bit embarrassed by this? And he goes, no, it's been the best thing that happened, because now I've got the real evidence that I needed, that we need to do something to improve our outcomes. So I think that really underpins this concept that if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. So when we first set this up, we had total coverage in New Zealand, so well done guys. So that was St John, New Zealand and Wellington Free Ambulance. And we had a fair chunk of the Australian mainland. We were missing ACT and New South Wales. And so some of the figures that I'm going to present are based on this first round of data collation from 2015. I'm really pleased to say that New South Wales and Tasmania have now joined us. And I know that when I did a similar talk like this in the 2017, I think CAA, that was still blank. So that's probably been our major update with the Epistry, that we've now pretty much got most of Australia committed to sharing core data. It's not their entire data sets, but it's core variables to the Aus-ROC Epistry, which is based at Monash University in Melbourne. We've had a couple of publications already. We've done a description of the ambulance services that contribute to the Epistry, and we've also done a description of establishing the Epistry, because I found that a lot of people, especially if they didn't have a cardiac arrest registry in their own backyard, were really keen to talk to me about the process. And I think the take-home message that I kept repeating over and over was, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. I found some ambulance services in Australia and elsewhere were wanting to have this perfect registry that included everything you could possibly imagine, followed up patients into hospitals, etc., etc. And therefore they'd been spinning their wheels for years because they were chasing this perfection. Start with whatever data you can get on whatever cardiac arrest you can get and build that up. And of course, the fact that most ambulance services now have electronic patient care records does make it easier to collate the data in your individual home states, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to have employees who actually go through and identify any missed cases, extract data from the actual electronic patient care record, because I'm sure none of you will be surprised to know that sometimes boxes aren't ticked. We have to go through and read the patient care records and ascertain whether there was CPR done, whether this was a witnessed arrest, etc. So this Epistry is totally reliant on each individual ambulance service in Australia and New Zealand collecting their own data, we have nothing to do with that, and then submitting it via a secure link. It's de-identified via a secure link to Monash University. Got ethics approval because it's seen as a research initiative, but it is totally reliant on those. So what did we find when we looked at some of the basics? Well, we found that we're pretty lucky in Australia and New Zealand in that the ambulance services are pretty similar, but there are differences. And I think our description here showed that and this has been raised previously, is population density varies considerably from Wellington Free to Western Australia and Northern Territory, which have quite a small population density. The other thing that varies, and it's really related to the population density, is the number of paramedics with different levels. Western Australia and other rural areas do rely on the contribution of volunteer ambulance officers, and so that varies across Australia. But the main purpose of the Epistry was to investigate regional variations, not so we could give a star to the top one and a stick to the bottom, but so that we could better understand what's underpinning these regional variations. And we all find that very helpful. And I'd have to say, when we first started talking about this as the group, the steering committee, we were never going to identify individual ambulance services. That was the understanding and the agreement. But over time, people say, well, we don't mind. And so now all of our publications actually identify results for individual ambulance services. And I think this is to really be applauded as an indication of a change in culture over the last decade. We include all cardiac arrests where possible, and we look at those that did get resuscitation by paramedics and those that didn't. And our primary outcome remains survive the event, which is defined as ROSC on arrival at hospital. But of course, what we're really interested in is whether they survived hospital or 30 days. But some ambulance services don't have the capacity to collect that. And this is something we really need to do, lobby our health services and our governments to support this capacity for ambulance services to find out what actually happened to the person. The paper, our first analysis of data paper, is available in the journal Resuscitation. And what we found was of the nearly 20,000 cardiac arrests that, and just for those in Australia, that the figure for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest in Australia is estimated to be around 25,000 a year. Of those, 66% were male, 66 years of age, 75% occurred in the home, and this has got massive ramifications for when you think about public access to fibrillation, and that was certainly raised in the Global Resuscitation Alliance masterclass yesterday. 74% are presumed cardiac, and I'll just reiterate, that really does mean presumed because there's no other obvious cause. So there's no drugs, devices, any other external source that can be attributed. So of those, research that was done in Victoria showed that a lot of them aren't actually cardiac in origin, but that's what is referred to internationally as presumed cardiac. Some of the other key differences were bystander CPR rates. When you look at that, they don't actually vary greatly, and they're not bad by international standards. And I know that all of the ambulance services, this has gone up now. But really, these are, when you're looking at only 2/3 of bystander witness cardiac arrests having bystander CPR, there's a lot of scope for improvement there, because that means that someone who's actually collapsed with someone else next to them, for whatever reason, is not getting bystander CPR. We know that that increases the chance of survival by doubling it, doubles the chance of survival. So this is a real low-hanging fruit for improvement. Cardiac arrest shockable rhythms are certainly less than what they used to be. I did my PhD about 20 years ago, and it was more like 40% of cardiac arrests were VFVT arrests. That's easily jumped to conclusion that it's all about response time, but response times haven't actually increased that much across Australia. Probably the underlying pathology is changing, and also I do know that the cases that we attempt resuscitation on have changed over those 20 years. So people who would not possibly have been attempted resuscitation 20 years ago now are. The good point is, though, that shockable obviously has got a great outcome, but we see a lot of survivors in the PEA group, so I don't think I would ever put them in the same category as asystole. So what were some of the results? Well, about half got attempted resuscitation. This is pretty standard across the world. I mean, these results are very consistent with what you'll find across the world. About 33% had ROSC in the pre-hospital setting, 28% on arrival, and survival to discharge, or 30 days, because some people can't collect discharge, but they can get date of death, was around 12%. Once again, that's pretty average, but as I alluded to before, only 5 out of our ambulance services at the time could actually collect that outcome because of all sorts of barriers that are put up within their individual states. So we'd like to, when we're comparing things, we try to be comparing apples with apples as much as possible. And the so-called Aus-ROC comparator group, which is bystander witness arrests that were found to be in a shockable rhythm on arrival of the paramedics or were shocked by a AD, in that group, there was 31% survival, and that varied between 29 to 40%. I don't need to tell you this because someone did this morning, but a lot of people don't understand where this Aus-ROC bit came from. It's an abbey in Norway, and certainly the International Liaison Committee on Resuscitation held its initial meetings there to come up with the uniform definitions for use in cardiac arrest. So we talk about the Aus-ROC template, that's where that originated, and I've just listed the most recent template update there. So we always like to compare against Seattle. Seattle's got great outcomes for these Aus-ROC comparator groups. Why? Because for a number of years they've looked at strengthening every link in their chain of survival. And as Mickey Eisenberg's been quoted many times here, it takes a system to save a life. So over my career involvement with resuscitation, we've seen defibrillation gain prominence over over CPR, and then drugs had the prominence. Basically, now we realise that to get good outcomes in your system, you need to look at every one of those components in that link, in that chain of survival, every link in the chain of survival to improve outcomes. So what's our plan with the Aus-ROC Epistry? Well, we've got a publication plan. It's sort of come as a bit of a halt at the moment because our database manager at Monash, Ben Beck, who all of the publications so far, he's the lead author on, he did a wonderful job, but he's resigned from the position because he's really focusing on trauma now. And so we're in the process of advertising for another research fellow at Monash, and hopefully then we can rejig. We've got other data in for subsequent years, and we can start producing some more papers. We really want to look at risk adjustment because our previous paper were just crude rates. We want to adjust for things like bystander CPR, initial rhythm, etc. So we really can get a better idea of what the outcomes are. And of course, there's a lot of other really interesting questions to be looking at. Subgroup analyses, things like pediatrics, pediatric outcomes, and paramedic witness arrests, I personally think are a really interesting group. They obviously had prodromal symptoms in order to call for an ambulance. We're certainly interested at pre-crew in can we better predict who they are when they call for an ambulance. So lots of work to be done there. This is my wish list for individual state ambulance service registries, which hopefully then can one day feed into the Aus-ROC Epistry. But really it'd be great to know a little bit more about the prodromal symptoms, about the past medical history and comorbidity. If someone's around to give that to the paramedics, they write it down, but sometimes public cardiac arrest, there's no one around. So, and look at things like including the dispatch, more about the dispatch data and the CPR quality, both of the bystanders and also of the paramedics, timings of interventions. Post-resuscitation care has tended in the past to be a black box. We pay for a nurse to follow up every cardiac arrest presenting to hospital in Perth, but it's an expensive venture, but it gives a really rich data as to what went on when they got to hospital, so that we can better understand what sort of prognostication's going on in hospitals, particularly in the ICUs. Understand the in-hospital diagnosis, look at the neurological outcomes, because it's really important not just to be alive but to be functionally alive, and look at what's the state of health after that. And certainly in WA we do the CPC stroke functional outcomes, and in Victoria they're following up quality of life. So these are all important outcomes from a patient perspective. The challenges identifying or setting up a cardiac arrest registry, Epistry we call it, epidemiologic registry, because the idea is that we're going to use it for epidemiologic studies. Funding is a major issue. We are looking at applying for another NHMRC grant this year to fund the Epistry. Of course, individual ambulance services fund their own state-based, but we need funding to bring that data together, to clean it up, to analyse it, draft papers, etc. So we will be applying again for an NHMRC grant. Data harmonisation is an ongoing process. I mean, I've just been astounded at the creativity of interpretations in what we thought were standardised definitions, both between organisations but even within. So I think we might think everyone's on the same page, but believe me, they're not. And I think the key to all of this, and it's been a real pleasure, has been the collaboration that does go on between the ambulance services, and none of this would be possible without it. Quite simply, it just wouldn't happen. And I think our motivation for all of us is the knowledge that we can make a difference to both the victim's life but also their family. And these are all survivors from WA, and this one's particularly heartwarming. The little chap on the right, his story's available on YouTube, but he was having a party with a few friends in the pool. He had an arrest. His mate there with the blondie kept his head above water and called for help. And fortunately there was a mother there who'd done CPR training, called the 000 and happy ending. But it just shows that, you know, when the system all works together, you do get some great outcomes. So I'd like to thank again all of the registry staff in each of the ambulance services throughout Australia and New Zealand. This is not possible without your dedication. We need to all support the ongoing registry developments within individual states. There's still some registries that do struggle to get the funding to do the data cleaning that they would like. We're very privileged in Western Australia that St John's supports this, so I personally thank them for that. So further information about Aus-ROC, we've got a website there, and of course I would be remiss not to promote the work that we're doing and pre-crew in Western Australia, so feel free to contact me about either of those issues. Thank you.